Americans increased by 150% over those reported the previous year in some of the country's most populous cities, according to data compiled by California State University's Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism that was provided to the Voice of America. This isn't the first time that the Asian American community has been the target of racist scapegoating connected to a disease. Here with more on that is Maggie Kurth, senior science reporter for 538. She's based in Minneapolis. Always good to talk with you, Maggie.
Thanks for having me back.
Okay, give us the connection here between the pandemic and these horrible attacks.
Well, before these specific attacks happened, there had been this knowledge that attacks against Asians and Asian Americans in the U.S. was on the rise. And my colleague Alex Samuels at 538 had actually written a story just last week that addressed some of this. She was looking at this long history of scapegoating and racism playing a role in how this country responds to crises, including disease outbreaks. And there's all these examples that just go back for years and years and years. During the original SARS outbreak in the early 2000s, Asian neighborhoods in the U.S. lost huge amounts of revenue. And that's despite there being not a single SARS death in this country at all. If you go even further back in history, you have Asian neighborhoods that have been barricaded and even burned when the people who lived there were blamed by white authorities for spreading disease.
So there's good evidence to make this connection.
There absolutely is. And I think that one of the really interesting things in this story is the point that Alex makes about how disease is political. The virus itself doesn't have politics, but it exists in this world where racism and bigotry spreads as easily as any pandemic. And so you get a narrative that blames a disease on a particular racial group, and it works its way through society. And if we haven't actively fought against it, it ends up getting normalized into the way that people are thinking. It becomes kind of part of
normalizing it by
just
not
kind of part of that background
mentioning the president. I mean, he
Let's
did
talk
earlier,
about
but you could
other
mention the
COVID-related news this week.
expert.
There's been a lot of attention in Europe about AstraZeneca's
Meaning President
vaccine
Trump,
causing
who was the
blood
one who
clots.
says China
And
virus.
Anthony
He's the
Fauci
one who
was
says
asked
it.
about
He's
that
the
on
one who
Thursday.
promoted the racism.
Give us an idea of what's
Like he does
going on
with
here.
everything he
Yeah,
does.
so this has been a really
Because he's a Nazi.
confusing week for the status of the AstraZeneca vaccine. It's not yet approved for use in the US, but it has been widely used across Europe and really the rest of the globe. I think India is another really big user. And this week you had more than 20 European countries that temporarily stopped using it because of these side effect concerns. So this is really complicated. And the story that I found most enlightening was one at Science that was from Gretchen Vogel and Kai Kupferschmidt. And they framed it essentially as a clash between the priorities of public health experts and the priorities of vaccine safety experts.
So what are these safety concerns?
Well, it boils down to this. There have been at least 13 patients in continental Europe who've developed what is honestly a really distressing set of symptoms. It was originally reported as blood clots, which if it were just run-of-the-mill blood clots, 13 out of tens of millions of doses wouldn't be something you'd be concerned about, right? Like that's actually less frequent than what you'd expect to find in just a random sample of unvaccinated people. But these weren't ordinary blood clots. Vogel and Kupferschmidt are writing about how what we're talking about is this widespread full-body blood clotting, internal bleeding, and low platelet counts. And 7 of those 13 people have actually died. So basically, you have the vaccine safety people looking at this and going, this is not normal. We should be a little bit concerned about what's going on here. We don't know what the situation is yet. And then you have the public health people looking at the same data and going, okay, but this is still a really super small number out of tens of millions of vaccinated people. And it's also not consistently happening everywhere that AstraZeneca vaccine is being used. So you have some countries like the UK that have used lots of AstraZeneca, but not had a single case of this syndrome. So, they're looking at this and thinking that, COVID is still a lot more dangerous than 13 out of tens of millions of a syndrome that may or may not be linked to the vaccine.
The EU, though, some countries have started shutting down or closing up a little bit now, haven't they?
Well, some of those countries have put a temporary pause on using AstraZeneca vaccine. And the EU regulator, though, the vaccine regulator there, actually came out yesterday and effectively they sided with the public health people. So they came out and said, we have looked at this and we have found that the AstraZeneca vaccine is not causing general run-of-the-mill blood clots. We can't rule out this really rare thing, but the risks of COVID are higher. So they're basically saying